let's talk Zach Wilson. We had an email, and the basic question: is there a lesson to be learned from Zach Wilson? What lessons do we want to learn? Do we have the bullet points on the email here?
Yeah, I have the whole email thrown into this chat somewhere. There you go.
Oh, there it is,
right on the screen in front of you.
You want me to read it?
Sure.
From Vishnu, I'm finding the retrospective discourse around Zach Wilson to be comically foolish. Much of the media is rushing to proclaim that, quote, everyone should have seen this coming, end quote. Zach Wilson only got drafted because of a pro day throw. He was never a first-round prospect, etc. Firstly, the pro day throw narrative is nonsensical. Zach Wilson had a historically great final season at BYU, both by standard box score and advanced metrics, including PFF grade. The fact that he had elite arm talent as well as enhanced that, I don't think the fact that he is busted in the NFL should make us completely revise our previous draft takes, which is why I appreciate Steve's argument that there doesn't always need to be a lesson learned. But I want to push one step further. Is it too much of a stretch for me to say that if a prospect of Zach Wilson's profile comes up in the future, a team should use a first-round pick on him? I just believe that the combination of production and ability is so rare that it's worth chasing, even if there are other red flags. Thanks, Vishnu. There's one lesson I do think that maybe we can learn from the Zach Wilson evaluation. I'll get to that in a moment, but let's debunk the revisionist history, like the idea that the pro day throw or whatever it was led to Zach Wilson being locked in at number 2 is false, because he was pretty much locked in at number 2 by January 1st, by the new year, right? I mean, I have old tweets talking about, the Jets lose out on Trevor Lawrence, right? I made my Fresh Prince joke. When Trevor falls, goes splat, and I say, look, that's Jets fans. You lost him because you beat the Jags. People liked that. And people are they're sending me Zach Wilson pictures. Like, don't worry, we got Zach Wilson. It wasn't Justin Fields at the time. For a while, it was Fields and Lawrence.
Yes.
Beginning of the year is Fields and Lawrence. By December, that had switched. And Zach Wilson was the clear QB2. And then pro days aren't until March.
Right.
And at March, Zach Wilson has the off-balance throw and this and that. So are there reasons why Zach Wilson became an attractive prospect? Yes. And I think it was what was happening in the NFL at that time, which was Mahomes' success over the last couple of years and Josh Allen's success, and Justin Herbert had just come off a really good year. And arm talent was front and center in the minds of NFL evaluators before the pro day throw.
Yeah. I think there's a few different ways history is being revised with hindsight now with Zach Wilson. The first of which is a lot of people saying, all of these flaws were obvious from his tape in college. He should never have been the number 2 overall pick. This guy was never a good prospect. He was never going to work out. I knew it all along. I was pointing out this stuff back in the day when it wasn't cool, right? Now, look, there were people that didn't like Zach Wilson. Our guy, Darius Butler, who's on Pat McAfee's show now, he's all over the place. He was on the PFF draft show that year. And I don't think he liked Zach Wilson at all. He was very critical of a lot of this stuff. But the thing about that is, when we talked about this on yesterday's show with quote unquote toolsy quarterbacks, there is this implied slight to other elements of their game. Otherwise, they would simply just be good quarterbacks. They would be Trevor Lawrence, where there is no flaw to his game as a prospect. There's no weakness. We're not criticizing anything. We just love Trevor Lawrence. When you're talking about a toolsy quarterback, inherently there is something about their game that isn't there yet. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talked about that way. So anytime it doesn't work out, it's obvious that you can point to the flaws and be like, well, that was the issue. I mean, that was there all along. Well, of course it was. But nobody cared because of the upside and the other things of his game. Only that wasn't enough this time, right? Like if Josh Allen hadn't panned out, if Josh Allen had been the guy he was as a rookie and just kept on going at that level and eventually got crapped out of the league, it would be easy to go back and look at his tape and be like, well, that was all there. Like this scattershot madness and like erratic behavior in the pocket. Like it's all at Wyoming. How did nobody see this? Well, of course they saw it. It was the fact that he was also 6'5" and 240 pounds and had a howitzer for an arm. So we figured he could be better than that, and he can. So I think focusing on just what was bad about his college tape doesn't really do you any good because people knew that. Like, that's not a secret. The issue is, to me, the real area of like, what can we learn is I do think the rise of Zach Wilson, the separation of Zach Wilson from the rest of those quarterbacks, right? From Justin Fields in particular, but also Mac Jones, Trey Lance. All of a sudden, it went from Trevor Lawrence and maybe Justin Fields to Trevor Lawrence and then Zach Wilson and then the rest. Why? And I don't think there was ever a good reason for that, other than it just became very clear quite quickly that that's the way the NFL saw it. And this is where I think there is a danger to groupthink in the draft process. Because I think sometimes when it becomes clear that like everybody has separated them in the same way, you just kind of go along with it. You're like, all right, fine, I can see it. You know, like you talk yourself into it. Like when I went through the 5 quarterbacks in that first round, I quite liked them all for various different reasons, right? So at that point, you're like, well, all 5 of those guys I think are pretty good. So if everybody else has Wilson too, and you have, and the rest of the guys 3, 4, and 5, I don't hate it enough to disagree. So I'm kind of on board with that. So that to me is that's the area where you go back and you say, why did that happen? Because nothing changed. Right? This was after the season. It didn't happen during the year where all of a sudden he's having this incredible year. Like, oh, it's propelled him there. It happened after everybody has already got all the information. And then for some reason, the NFL just determined that Wilson was the clear 2 in that group.
I think a lot of it, I spent more time, I think, asking questions than that was when I was very lukewarm on all my takes that offseason. I was more asking questions. But one of the questions I kept asking was, does the rise of Mahomes, say Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, does the rise of those guys, the fact that they became stars and pretty quickly, change the quarterback evaluation process? And I think it did. Fields didn't maybe benefit from it as much, but I think maybe Mac Jones was hurt from it. Even at PFF, would we have looked at Mac Jones, who had the highest graded Power 5 season we'd ever seen to that point? Granted, it was a COVID year. Grades were a little bit higher, I think, in 2020, right? In 2020. Would we have been pushing Mac Jones as like a top 3 pick in previous years because the production was there? And did we sour on him a little bit because he's not as arm talenty as some of these other guys? I think we got swayed by that too.
And also because remember that again, what else is around at the time I think is relevant, because Mac Jones's entire draft or pre-draft narrative was viewed through the prism of the 49ers just traded up to 3. Somebody is saying it's for Mac Jones. That's ridiculous. That was the prism that everybody was looking at Mac Jones through. It's like he can't possibly be worth number 3 and 3 first-round draft picks. That's madness, right? Whereas if you just sort of stepped back and looked at him in a vacuum and said, is Mac Jones worth X pick? It's a different viewpoint.
By the way, listen to me. I said this when Mina was on the show, and I think she raised her eyebrows at me. If Mac Jones was drafted by the Niners, I think he's doing exactly what Brock Purdy's doing, if not better. Mm-hmm. I think Mac Jones, if the rumors are true, Kyle Shanahan really wanted Mac Jones, and others in the organization maybe talked him out of it in order to get Trey Lance. And by the way, we talked ourselves into Trey Lance as a good fit for Kyle Shanahan too because of the run game aspect and all that. I think Mac Jones would put up monster numbers,
which I wrote at the time
for the Niners.
Like when I went through Mac Jones's tape and said, what would this look like in Shanahan's offense? I was like, he could absolutely be worth the number 3 overall pick. Now, I also said I wouldn't trade 3 first-round picks to get there. But if you're telling me this quarterback at number 3 in this offense is the equation, I'm in. Like his processing, his ability to get the ball where it needs to go at the right time is a perfect marriage for Kyle Shanahan's offense. It's just the trade that took to get there was the only thing that would have me going, yeah, not really.
So I think in 2021, as we're drafting quarterbacks and the 5 guys go in the first round, and like you said, I think it was a little bit of what do you like? I thought Trey Lance looked like a guy that you could build a run game around, who had to develop as a passer. Fields, I thought, was going to be a different type of player who had passing skills, but you had to. He did hold the ball too long at Ohio State, and we didn't know that he was Lamar Jackson-esque as a runner. Trevor Lawrence was going to be your one in the whole thing. But I think the league was at a point where people were back to chasing upside after getting burned for years, after Blaine Gabbert and Jake Locker and Christian Hackenberg in the second round and whoever, right? Akili Smith years ago. For years,
wow,
they had been burnt.
Akili Smith, huh?
Right? He was a toolsy number 3 overall quarterback, right? And we'd always say, when was the last toolsy quarterback to really
Yeah.
figure it out. And you could go to like Brett Favre. You could go to, I mean, John Elway, but like he had a successful track record too.
But also he was the perfect prospect. He was
Right.
not. He was the Trevor
Andrew
Lawrence.
Luck Andrew Luck wasn't just a toolsy guy. Like he was
Same.
productive with tools, right? Which is different. For like Achilles Smith had never like played good football, right? Blaine Gabbert had never really played good football. Jake Locker had rarely played good football. Christian Hackenberg certainly had not played good football. And people they bet on traits. Hashtag bet on traits. And I think the league had come back around to that because Justin Herbert played better football in the NFL than he did in college. So did Josh Allen.
Cam Newton, I guess, was a workout toolsy guy.
Yeah, Cam's tough because it was a 1-year sample, but he dominated in college. He dominated at Auburn and led his team to the national title, right? I mean, that's not Jake Locker. Jake Locker was always like a what if, No, Jake Locker was like, oh, this is Tebow West.
But he did it in a very unconventional, NFL style offense. So I think he still absolutely fits the category of toolsy quarterbacks.
Sure. So maybe Cam's a hit, whatever.
Yeah.
There weren't many of them. But then we had this run, right, where Patrick Mahomes improved his weaknesses in the NFL. And so did Justin Herbert. And Lamar Jackson's weaknesses completely masked when he got to the NFL because he was so good at everything else, right? Like all these guys ended up doing that. So people are looking at Zach Wilson being like, yeah, winning from the pocket's nice and all, but Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, yeah, they're retired. They're getting old. That's the old way. You got to make off-platform throws. You got to have special arm talent now. Win from the pocket, yes, but then have special arm talent. And that was Zach Wilson. That is Zach Wilson. Special arm talent, off-platform, jump throws. Looks like Aaron Rodgers the way he throws. He was getting Aaron Rodgers comps. Some people are putting him as QB1 over Trevor Lawrence. So it was a little bit of groupthink, but it was a lot of people that jumped on board because that was the thing that was working that year, right? And the one thing that we should learn is, our friend Josh Norris points it out all the time. He was throwing from the biggest pockets you've ever seen at BYU, Zach Wilson. So even from a production standpoint, you'd have to say that is very rare. It's not going to happen. And, some of the scouts or evaluators that I talked to said they hate the way he looks under pressure. And even though we've talked about pressure being less stable, I do think there's something to the traits, the scouty analysis of how you handle pressure. I think there's something to, do you step into throws? Do you bail pockets? I think that part matters. And a lot of people hated the way Zach Wilson played under pressure. And that part's been true. He has not handled pressure well. A lot like Baker Mayfield hasn't handled pressure well, and that stuff got exaggerated at the NFL level. So I think if there's a lesson, it's that maybe the production part was overrated because pockets were huge, level of competition was low, and some of the stuff that we needed to see that would translate to the NFL maybe got overlooked in Zach Wilson's game.
I think there's a big part of the things that we needed to see in order to correctly identify Zach Wilson's weaknesses at the NFL level were not actually available in his college tape. Like, that's the problem to me. It's kind of like the Mahomes thing where the question mark on Mahomes coming out was not obvious examples of him not being able to do something. It was an unknown, right? The reason he went, where'd he go, 11, as opposed to number 1 overall, was not because we knew for a fact that he couldn't do something. It was because we didn't know, because he played so far outside of the structure of the offense as a general basis. You're like, well, does that function in an NFL offense? Like, can he just be put into an Andy Reid offense or anybody else's and run the system and then bring what he does outside of the structure on top of that as gravy? Because that's great. If he can't, then he's certainly not who he is right now, and he's probably not even a first-round quarterback. He's just like this maverick that, like, he's Johnny Manziel at that point, right? This guy that only does outside of structure stuff.
Can we get that headline?
But this is
Sam compares Patrick Mahomes to Johnny Manziel.
If something happened, right?
No, I heard the direct comparison.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, if that was the actual truth, that he could not work within structure and could only do the outside of structure stuff, I mean, that's Johnny Manziel, right? Johnny Manziel is one of the best throws in the NFL over the last 5 years, where he bails from the pocket, runs to his left, and fires an absolute dime, to whoever was at the other end of that. Like, incredible play. But that's all he could do. He couldn't stand in the pocket and run an NFL offense. So when you're looking at Mahomes' tape coming out of Texas Tech, it's like, I don't know if he can do that. And doing that is the difference between being the best quarterback in the NFL and being Johnny Manziel, like where you are on that scale. So with Zach Wilson, it's like that dude is basically never under pressure. I don't know if he can handle being under pressure at any kind of sensible level in the NFL. And whether or not he can essentially determines, is he a really good quarterback or is he Zach Wilson? And then the other element I think is true is nobody knew that he was a douchebag, you know? Like, let's not forget that the reason the guy doesn't have a job right now is not because he sucks. It's because he completely bailed from taking responsibility for sucking. And his team essentially pulled up the drawbridge and went, what the hell with you? We're rolling with Mike White. And they had to sit him down. Like, they didn't bench him because he played badly. They benched him because he went out after the game and went, nope, I don't feel any responsibility for this. And his entire team went, excuse me?
And I've made that point before when we were talking about Chris Sims and his QB rankings and all that stuff and the run that he went, he kept picking the right quarterback. Well, he also put Zach Wilson number one, right? I mean, so, but we're not privy to those things,
and
right?
That's also the kind of thing that only manifests when things are going badly.
Probably.
Know? Like, if BYU was bad, you might have seen some of that, right? All of a sudden, Zach Wilson isn't taking responsibility or he's throwing other people under the bus, and now you're like, ooh, I don't know. But like, if they were only good, it's literally never going to surface. So it's actually impossible to predict that.
So that's where we're not privy to that stuff, and that's just as difficult, I think, as using production, right? I've heard a lot of hindsight analysis. I've heard how teams evaluated, say, Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen from a psychological standpoint, and I don't know how much is hindsight or how much they actually gleaned foresight into, hey, Baker Mayfield's career could be a little uneven because he shows these things in psychological testing, or Josh Allen's the guy that you want to bet on. Like, this dude's just going to get it and get better because the psychological testing. You were talking about Tebow yesterday, right? And how Josh McDaniels like got the leader, right? He may have used that as his baseline, where he said, I've just been with the greatest leader in NFL history in Tom Brady. Everybody rallies around him and he's a winner and might not have the best arm or this, but that's the foundation that I need. I want that in Tebow. Maybe they're looking at the wrong foundation, but it's certainly a part, right? It's still part of the house. Maybe it's the roof, whatever it is. But the psychological aspect, look at me, metaphoring.
Mm-hmm.
Throw Steve up. I'm a positive metaphors.
Add it to the tally.
The psychological part matters. It absolutely matters. And it's not just the stuff you hear in the media, like this guy can learn, this guy can't learn. Now there's like a big media push to, I think, protect Zach Wilson and say, well, the guy cares. He works hard, right? It was like Aaron Rodgers was telling him, there's some story out there, was it Burt Breer or something, where Aaron Rodgers was talking to him his rookie year, and like a Friday night, it's like, Zach, where are you? He's like, oh, I'm at the stadium. I'm just grinding film. And Aaron's like, dude, go home. You're overthinking it too much, right? And then the next year they simplified the offense or whatever it is. I don't know. There's like this push now to say, well, Zach Wilson does care. He does watch film. So like, I don't know where the truth is in there.
I'm sure he cares. I don't think that was ever.
But there's truth in all of the off-field. Do you learn? Do you care? Are you a good teammate? Are you a good leader? But then obviously it's difficult to figure that out because teams would never miss if you could very clearly figure it. They never would have drafted Zach Wilson.
Yeah, to me, so that's what I'm saying. To me, if you're looking back and you're saying, what are the learnings we can take from the Zach Wilson failure, which I think it is at this point, is I don't think you can necessarily have seen coming the way he abdicated responsibility and lost the locker room. I don't know that that was a piece of evidence that was available to you before the draft. If it was probably like through the battery of ridiculous tests that they put these guys in, or interview questions or whatever absurd thing they're trying to ask to generate some kind of response like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a hell of a, like, if you're staking your reputation on that, like, oh, he answered this one random ass question in a weird way, I don't like it. I walk away.
It's at least a data point, though.
Yes.
I respect that it's at least data points, and then you have to evaluate the data points over time and see if there are any patterns.
But you know what I mean? Like, if you're basically walking away from the number 2 overall pick because he answered a weird question about like whether he likes a dog or a cat in a strange way, like, that's a hell of a statement to make. Number 2, I don't know if the play under pressure stuff was necessarily as obvious as people are making it sound because of the nature of that offense. To me, the big learning is everybody taking a step back and collectively evaluating why he went from just in the middle of the pack of these quarterbacks to the clear number 2 behind Trevor Lawrence. Why did that happen? Yeah. And why did we all just sort of accept it when it happened, rather than questioning it and saying, is he really obviously better than Justin Fields? Is he even better than Mac Jones? Like, Sure, the arm's better, but is the totality, like, that's the learning to me, is figuring out why that happened and then making sure it doesn't happen the next guy.
One last thing that made the Wilson thing difficult, you could point to like him being a one-year wonder, right? He was going into the season, he was like a good mid-round prospect, right? People might have liked him a little bit, and then he became the number 2 overall pick. But that's been more successful than not over the years. Just in the PFF era, the one-year wonders include Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, and Joe Burrow did it from as a starter and then became an elite starter. Kyler Murray went from not starting to Heisman winner, elite starter. Dwayne Haskins was a one-year wonder.
Kenny Pickett.
Mitchell Trubisky was a one-year wonder, and you could argue Kenny Pickett, right? He goes from middle of the pack. I would say there's more hits than misses there, right? Kyler's a hit, Burrow's a hit, Trubisky and Haskins miss. Pickett's probably a hit. Now, Mac Jones was a one-year wonder. He's more of a hit than a miss, right? So there's more hits than misses in one-year wonders, whereas Zach Wilson, goes down probably as a miss there.
Yeah,
but there wasn't anything that said, oh, it's because he only did it for 1 year. Well, there's a lot of hits in there, too, for guys that only did it for their last year in college.
That used to be the thing people hated. Like, it was Bill Parcells wouldn't touch a guy if he didn't have, like, I forget what the number was, but like 25 starts or something. Like, there was a line which was like a 2 or a 3 year starter. If you didn't have that many starts, Parcells wanted nothing to do with you as a prospect. And this was back at the time where like Jamarcus Russell was like the poster boy for low number of starts equals disaster at the next level.
I might revisit that a little bit. Not necessarily for my elite starters, but like getting a starter, getting your Brock Purdy, getting your Kenny Pickett.
Now. I don't know if you need X number of starts anymore, because I think the whole landscape is different.
I think a lot of the misses, though, are your Sam Darnolds and guys that Mitchell Trubisky's and guys that didn't have starts over time. I don't know. Good discussion. To answer the original email, though, there's a lot of revisionist history.
Yes.
There's a lot of revisionist history. And I just want to finish with this that I'll mention in team building season a ton. It does not set the organization back to miss on a quarterback. The Jets are still sitting here with a good roster, maybe an Aaron Rodgers trade away or whatever it might be. It's okay that they missed. That's what I would say. I also don't know that there was a clear alternative. As great as Justin Fields was as a runner down the stretch, the jury's still out on what Justin Fields will become. He looks like the second best quarterback in that class, probably. But we could be sitting here a year from now saying Mac Jones is the second best quarterback in the class behind Trevor Lawrence. That it could be Mac Jones. There's not like a clear the Jets should have done this other thing in the draft.
I don't think I agree that it doesn't set you back, but I think the point is more, what's the alternative? Like, missing on a quarterback and not having a quarterback, you then end up back where you started, potentially with some other deficiencies down the road. I think it does set you back, but the point is you have to get a quarterback. So like the alternative is not having one at all and just not going anywhere.
The alternative is if the Jets went in and said, we're just not going to draft a quarterback. We're going to draft Jamar Chase.
So
or like what if they got the best players in the draft that aren't quarterbacks? Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, or Micah Parsons, say. Yeah, it's better but they wouldn't have won anything the last 2 years, much like they didn't win anything really the last 2 years.
So I do think it's a small backward step to take a quarterback high, miss on him, and then have to start all over again. But it's probably, it's the thing you have to do because you need the quarterback. Otherwise, there is no alternative option to that.